We now call the meeting to order. If you could please rise if you are able and pay attention to Councilmember Emerson for the invocation to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Before I introduce our guest minister tonight, sometimes when you're in this position, you start to feel pretty good about yourself, and you maybe get this inflated sense of importance. So I ran into Pastor Clark actually at the Walmart up at 25th in California, and I recognized him from a funeral I'd gone to, and he kind of looks at me, and I can tell he's kind of seen me before. So, I said, "You're Pastor Clark, right?" He said, "Yeah," and I said, "I'm Tony Emerson," and he said, "Oh, you're Sydney's dad." So I'm grateful to be Sydney's dad, so thank you for that. But so Pastor Clark is the pastor of Love Fellowship Church. It's at 27th and Minnesota. They have services every 10 o'clock every Sunday morning. Just real briefly, Pastor Clark was born in Detroit, where he grew up under the training of his father and grandfather, who were also founding pastors of churches. In 2009, Pastor Clark graduated from American Baptist Bible College, where he met his wife, Naviz. They have 5 children. Wow, that 4 was a lot. Since his arrival in Topeka in 2013, Pastor Clark has said that Topeka is his assignment, and therefore he considers himself a servant of the people of Topeka and its surrounding communities. Pastor Clark, thank you for being here tonight.
Will you bow with me? Gracious God, our Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessings of this day. I pray now, God, for these, your sons and daughters, my brothers and sisters, who you've gifted all so well. And I pray now, God, that you will crown them with wisdom and knowledge from on high as they make decisions to govern your people. Remind them each and every day that they handle precious cargo. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If Jessica Linher could join me at the front. So we are very proud as a community to support wonderful organizations in our city. And one of the ways that is very meaningful that we do so is by supporting United Way. United Way has been an organization that has transformed their giving model into really trying to figure out how they can partner with the needs of the community to ensure that there is change in action being taken. And it was a bold move, and Jessica has now been spearheading the organization for 2 years, right? And she has been doing some amazing things. With that, our staff, led by Kelly Baker, who is not here today, did some pretty cool things. If you've seen some shirts that say Topeka, and it's like Topeka, those were being sold here. There was a lot of people supporting and trying to figure out how they were going to give so that United Way could continue its mission. So with that, if the chief could please join us with the check. We want to, on behalf of the city, make a presentation to the United Way. Don't take this one to the bank. But to all of our employees who contributed, just $11,687 were raised from the city of Topeka. So from all of us to you, we just want to say thank you for contributing and ensuring that families have what they need in our community. So Jessica, if you could say a few words.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. We surely support the city of Topeka and appreciate everything you did for the campaign. I must say, they killed it this year. I think a lot of that has to do with Kelly and of course with you, with the mayor, and support from the city manager. We really, it was a fun campaign, and you guys really almost, I think you doubled. You almost doubled your the amount you raised the year before. So we can't thank you enough. It really does make a big difference. Every dollar counts, and it helps us to further invest in our community so that we can make sure more kids are doing well in school, that families are financially stable, that we have a healthy community, and that we're also still providing the basic needs. So thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. We're going to proceed now with the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Hiller. Here. Clear. Here. Ortiz. Here. Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lester.
Here.
Before we proceed with the agenda, there have been some events that have transpired in our community with the police department, and it has had our community with a lot of concern. The chief, the city manager, and I have been working together to ensure that we reach out to our constituents, letting them know how concerned we were with regards to the tweet that was sent out from the police officers, Department of the Police account, and to address this issue publicly before we start the meeting, because we felt it was this crucial. The chief of police is here to say a few words. Chief.
Mayor, city manager, governing body, I'm here tonight on behalf of the Topeka Police Department to apologize to you and the citizens of Topeka for a Father's Day post that was made by a member of our social media team. The social media team was something that I installed when I took over. Part of that was to include transparency and accessibility of the Topeka Police Department 24 hours a day. We have about a 15-member team. They receive training and all that good stuff, but as I'd like to say, this is the human factor that comes into it. No matter how much education, training, or experience that we have, people still do things that are in poor judgment. And so that is what this is about. Offer that apology on behalf of the Topeka Police Department. As a result of this, we are looking at our policy as it comes to social media, looking at whatever changes, alterations, or totally rewriting it. The social media team does operate with a certain amount of autonomy because they do work 24 hours a day. I was not aware of this post until much later in the day. I was out doing things on Father's Day. And so on behalf of the Topeka Police Department, to the governing body, the mayor, city manager, and the citizens of Topeka, I'd like to offer that apology.
Chief, thank you so much for coming here. I know that we're humans, but I appreciate the serious and concern that you have given this matter. We now move on with the regular agenda, so on to our scheduled show. Item number 3, the appointments, if the clerk would read.
A is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Debbie Bassini to the Civil Service Commission to fill an unexpired term ending April 30, 2023. B is an advisory council appointment of Lindsay Spooner to the City of Topeka Americans with Disability Act Advisory Council for a term ending May 31, 2021. C is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Travis Thomas to the Topeka Board of Zoning Appeals to fill an unexpired term ending December 31, 2019, and a 3-year term ending 2031-2022. D is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Tim Karkoff to the Topeka Board of Zoning Appeals to fill an unexpired term ending December 31, 2019, and a 3-year term ending December 31, 2022. And E is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Joan Hicks to the Topeka Shawnee County Public Library Board of Trustees for a term ending April 30, 2023.
We have heard the consent agenda. What is the pleasure? Thank you, Councilman Lester. We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second by Councilmember Padilla. Comments or questions with regards to these appointments? Seeing none, we proceed by voting. The mayor does not vote.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. I believe that we do have Mr. Thomas and Mr. Karkoff here. If they could please rise if they're present. Thank you so much for your service to our community. Our boards are extremely important to us, so we appreciate your service to our city. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
A are minutes of the regular meeting of June 11, 2019, and there's a list of cereal malt beverage applications. Staff is recommending approval.
What is the pleasure of the body?
Second.
Yeah, we have a motion for approval by Councilman Mays, a second by Councilmember Lesser. Any questions or corrections for the minutes, or any questions with regards to this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the action items, if the clerk would read.
A is a public hearing on the advisability of establishing a community improvement district for the Sherwood Crossing Villa West development at 29th and Wanamaker, and an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout establishing a community improvement district for Sherwood Crossing Villa West development at 29th and Wanamaker, and levying a CID sales tax of 1% within the CID.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, governing body. I'll ask Deputy City Manager Doug Gerber to make a few initial comments, and then I know that the members of the developer are here, and I think they'll have some comments as well. Doug?
Mr. Manager, Madam Mayor, governing body, good evening. The first three agenda items all relate to the Sherwood Crossing Development Project. And normally when we have three items that follow each other on the agenda, I do an overview of all of them. But in this case, these three are different enough that I'd like to address them each individually. So at this point, I'll limit my comments to this particular item, which is establishment of the CID. At its most basic form, what we're asking you to do tonight is to hold a public hearing, and then at the conclusion of that public hearing, to establish a community improvement district for the area at 29th and Wanamaker, currently known as Villa West, but soon to be known as Sherwood Crossing. We've had a number of discussions about this item. We've had presentations by the developer, and the council has spoken favorably about this project. We've included in your packet, as required by our policy, a copy of the development agreement for your review, as well as some information about the project, which we've reviewed with you in the past. So at this point, I'm glad to stand for questions. Again, I know Mr. Neiman and Mr. Christie are here to speak during the public hearing, but I would be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the body before we proceed with the public hearing? Seeing no questions from the body, at this time we do have 3 individuals signed up to speak for the public hearing, and after that I will ask 3 times to see if there's any other individuals that would like to have the opportunity to speak on the public hearing who have not signed up. The first person signed up to speak in the public hearing, now that it's open, is Mr. David Christie.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you this evening. I'm David Christie with Christie Development out of Kansas City. Looking forward to starting the construction of Sherwood Crossing redevelopment that's been underway since I think we made application in early December of 2018. It's going to receive a major renovation, ripping off the canopies of the building, replacing the roof, starting completely over, and making, you won't recognize it when we're done. So terribly excited about it. Ferd's got a lot more detail of what we are doing, so he's happy to answer questions. I just wanted to thank you personally for all of you meeting with us individually and asking such great questions, because it appeared as you read the information that we provided and looked at what we plan to do to make this just a benefit to your community as a whole. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and otherwise Ferd can come up.
Seeing there's no questions. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Ferd Neiman.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me. Ferd Neiman with Christie Development and 29th Street Partners, the applicant and the developer of this project. Echoing Dave's comments, just want to thank you for the time you've given us thus far. I know we've been here a number of times. We've got a number of items on the agenda tonight. I think it looks like tonight the CID district, and then an internal revenue bond for the sales tax, it's not internal, industrial revenue bond for the sales tax exemption. And then we have the last item, is just a project plan for the TIF. And last night we met with the City Planning Commission. They approved that unanimously from a compliance standpoint, and as far as being in compliance with the comprehensive master plan. So that triggers, I think, the last step, which is a 30-day hearing, which would be for the approval of the development agreement, which would be a joint CID and TIF development agreement, as well as the TIF project plan. So we would, I know it's on the agenda in a couple items, but I wanted to mention it while I'm up here as well. I can obviously answer lots of any questions you have, but as far as the timing of that TIF project plan, it's my understanding that the regularly scheduled council meetings are the first 3 Tuesdays of a month, so not the 4th Tuesday in July or 5th Tuesday in July. And it's my understanding the first Tuesday in August happens to be canceled I think for purposes there was anticipated to be a primary election. So that would mean the next regularly scheduled city council meeting that is more than 30 days from last night would be August 13th. That's a long ways away for us from a construction standpoint. So what we'd like to respectfully request is that, I'm not trying to get the cart in front of the horse here, but if you approve the CID, that's good to go. If you approve the IRB, that's good to go. As it pertains to item 5C, the project plan, we would ask that you would consider a special meeting on Friday, July 19th, which would qualify for the 30 to 70 day public hearing notice for that last step, but also save us about 25 days before we get to the next regularly scheduled meeting. So I know it's a lot, and we've talked to city attorney's office about that, city management office about that, talked to several of you about that. Obviously, we don't want to be presumptuous in any vote and don't want to make any further inconveniences for anyone, but there's been some timeline challenges on our end, not blaming anyone here, just the way that this calendar works with a combination of statutory guidelines for a CID and a TIF. There's minimum notice requirements, there's maximum notice requirements, there's certain postings in newspapers, additional postings. There's a plan commission that meets once a month, a 30-day trigger from there. It ends up making a little bit of a calendar soup that we just have been working together with city staff on getting all the right dates and notices together. So that would be our request tonight, is if you do for item 5C, set that public hearing, that we could consider at any point, any time on the 19th would be our preference.
Does the body have any questions for Mr. Neiman? Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I probably could have asked anybody down the line, but I think people were deferring to you. Just to kind of set the framework, we have had some public input along the way about people had mixed feelings about us investing in a neglected shopping center, and worried that it might happen again, and also wondering just why we need, what the incentive's for. You bought that property and you would have fixed it up and done something anyway. So for the public, as much as anything else, could you explain why you're asking for the incentive money?
Sure.
I've got a three-part question, but explain why.
Well, yes, you're right, Councilwoman, that we've already purchased the property, so there's certain landlord responsibilities and repair and maintenance that would have to happen anyway. Roof leaks, you got to fix it. There's trash out front, you got to take care of it. Potholes, you got to take care of that. But we're looking at something that would be more of a transformation of the center, a rebranding, and as part of that, it's a much more, as you can see at our construction budget, it's a much more substantial budget, and that includes, we want to rip off the facade of the building and put up a newer, better facade, better signage, new roof, new HVAC, parking lot overlay, new landscape, new monument signs that are more in compliance with the new sign code that's not yet been approved, but it'd be, I think, better beautification of signage. We also would look to create additional buildings, there's additional square footage, which would also obviously create, additional property taxes and additional sales taxes. And as you look in the development agreement, there's a sales tax base put in place. So the TIF by its nature has a property tax base inherent with it. The TIF statute allows for a complete removal of sales taxes from the property would be redirected. City staff, very vehemently said that's not going to happen. So there's a sales tax base in place. So if we spend all this money, millions and millions of dollars renovating it, and there's no new sales and there's no new property taxes, we're going to get reimbursed nothing. So we're very motivated to spend the kind of money that's going to generate additional incremental property taxes and additional incremental sales taxes. And the TIF statute alone has several property tax carve-outs that are immune from redevelopment reimbursement. So that'll help certain taxing agencies. And then, of course, any new construction, especially on the north end of that shopping center, we've got about 3.5–4 acres of just grass. That is a very low property tax generator and it's zero sales tax generator. If we put 22,000, 25,000 square feet over there, that's going to be a big impact. And if you look at another thing that city staff and outside counsel and financial advisors required of us was a clawback, if you will, a triggering mechanism where if we don't build if that building, for example, is only 10,000 feet, we didn't meet the threshold that we came here and we showed you the pretty pictures of, we showed you the budget of, and then we get those dollars clawed back. So if you look, over $1.1 million of the incentives will go away And we've got placed in service dates from start of construction, completion of construction. So what we're asking the city to do is invest with us, a true public-private partnership where we'll overspend. I don't want to say overspend as being imprudent with financials, but we'll do a better job than we certainly would as just a regular landlord. No disrespect to another landlord or project, as much as this is not just to sit on it and manage it. And really, with a shopping center like this, we've got over 30% vacancy. Brick and mortar retail, you've probably heard, is struggling. It's a challenging environment. We do not own any of the 3 pad sites in front of the shopping center, which gives us limited control. We have a bank and 2 tire shops in front. So to really give our tenants and our prospective tenants, we're trying to go fishing with some bait here. And we can do that. We have better fascia signs, better pylon signs, and we have an incentive receivable revenue stream that we know we can put in this caliber of renovation. And you can look at, Mr. Christie's done 75 of these projects. They've all worked out pretty well for the community. You hear lots of horror stories about TIFs and incentives and what went wrong. They're not following him. And in this one, there's no GO bond, there's no collateral or guarantee by the municipality that we're asking for. So the risk is on us. We're asking you to be a partner in that.
If I may, the second part of that, and you've kind of tiptoed your way into it already, is that there are a lot of the comments we got, at least early on, were people who were a little shell-shocked, if you will, about having an owner neglect properties and then have a new owner come and want some assistance getting them developed. People worried that in 22 years we would just start that cycle again. Can you talk a little bit about the assurances that this body and the public could have that at the end of 22 years we would have something that we're still excited about?
Well, I think for assurances, you can look at some of the projects we've done in the community in the past and seeing what, the condition of those have been maintained. We're going to be putting in, in the city plan commission and city planning staff's going to require certain design guidelines and materials guidelines that, in theory, are going to be better materials, right, that are going to last longer. What happened in the past, if we were the developer that let it go into disrepair, then that would be like, killing your parents and asking for mercy because you're an orphan. That doesn't go very well, right? So don't blame us for the sins of the first guy. Is kind of our theme on that. Give us an opportunity to prove ourselves, and we're going to be putting money here. We're going to try to attract a blend of national, regional, and local tenants. So depending on who those tenants are, they will have certain maintenance requirements of us. I guess that's about all I can say on it. It's not our desire to come back. I've got lots of years left in my career, God willing. So if I'm here 15 years from now and you guys look at the last project and say, yeah, we know what you've done, that's not what we're looking for, and that's not what Mr. Christie's been doing, for years and years. He's been relying on the last project, and you can see the Crosswinds project. You can see he's done projects in about every corner of the community, and they've all been good. Some of those had incentives, some of them didn't. I think the majority of them didn't. This one is in, as you said, is in a pretty large amount of disrepair.
Well, and that leads to the third question, if I may. When you first came, you said that in a perfect world, you would have only asked for one incentive, that being the SID. But that's all based on sales tax, and not all of your properties generate sales tax, because some have liquor tax and some are offices and so on. So you said you needed the second one in order to get the cash flow that you needed to get the remodeling done. We recently, then tonight, will also consider a third incentive, that being an industrial revenue bond. Could you address why that one needed to be added?
Yeah, so you were right. Originally, we looked at this as a CID only, a 1-cent sales tax add-on, and we dug more into it, looked at the existing tenant base, and we had the second largest tenant in the center disappeared, is probably the nicest way to say it, right after we bought the center. So that was a big sales tax. We thought would be a big rent payer, big sales payer. That's not anybody here's problem, but that made us really look, okay, how are we going to backfill these spaces? And, for example, CVS, prescriptions, there's no CID sales tax. Happy Bassett has already expanded once. We wanted them to expand again. There's no CID sales tax on alcohol. So if we get restaurants, another bar, any sort of banking, any sort of service, we've got haircut place, we got dog haircut place, we got barbershop, another haircut place, And we got, most of our tenants, they're not getting CID sales tax. So like, okay, we need to look outside the box here, especially if we're going to put more money, especially on new construction. So we looked at the TIF. So that's kind of where that came about. In the TIF, there's a carve out of 20 mills of the school district's levy that is always going to be there for them. So by us increasing the valuation, that helps the school district. The state levy, they didn't give that up, put that on the table for the cities to give away, so to speak. But the third item is industrial revenue bond. We originally specifically said we do not want to pursue that. And if you look at our original application, our original pro formas from a revenue standpoint, we have, in theory, coming back to us, the revenue of incremental property taxes minus the carve-outs, incremental sales taxes all sales taxes on a TIF and all sales taxes on a CID. After working with city staff, they said, we need to put a sales tax base in. Well, right now, if you look at the agreement, there's a $7 million sales tax base. Well, that's $70,000 a year of revenue that wasn't that we were anticipating in a pro forma that the statute calls for. I think the challenge here is that there have been very few TIFs in Topeka that had retail TIFs of a redevelopment. So it just probably has never been a topic that's been broached before, versus like the Wheatfield project, it was ground up developments. There was no real question of, 100% of the sales taxes, just like the statute calls for, are going to be redirected. Of course they are. Well, in our case, that became a sticking point. Well, for us, you can't spend the same amount of money and tell your bank, you get the same collateral package. Oh, by the way, that receivable that we're hoping to get, that we have to pledge to the bank from a TIF revenue reimbursement, by the way, it's going to get a $70,000 haircut. They're going to say, okay, no deal. What do you have to do? You can cheapen the project. That's not what we want to do. So we looked at it, and city staff, suggested, and we collaborated with them and said, what about a sales tax exemption, which waives from construction materials the sales tax for city. The city really is a smaller piece of that. It's really state is the most of that sales tax. And by virtue of doing that, there's some year one savings. So we ran the analysis, and Jeff White looked it over again, and it actually came out about the same, the sales tax, if you throw in that sales tax exemption. What we want to do is say, if we're going to do that, we want to be transparent about it, and we want it to come here. And we don't want to go to the county. There was an option to go to the county. And we didn't want to do that. And I think it's pretty foreign, I think, to this body to see this IRB, because the last couple projects all went to the county. So we don't want to do that. We originally put in the development agreement, it was a footnote saying we will specifically waive any rights to go to the county. We took that away. We didn't renege on that offer as much as the deal terms changed. That I think is a balance of, for the city, I think it's the way it's drafted now is much more favorable. To the state, it's less favorable. But to us, as Dennis, it's almost a wash. It's a little short, but it's kind of a de minimis change when you put the timing of expenses and cash flows, the revenue. The IRB is less is more painful for us to absorb than the sales tax, but it's a year one thing as opposed to a spread out thing. So when you bring a net present value to that, it ends up being about a wash, which is something we're comfortable with. I realize it's a new ask that wasn't here, and that's the history of why I got here.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to kind of lay out those pieces if we could up front.
Absolutely.
Additional questions from the body? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Neiman.
All right, thank you.
Next person signed up to speak is Mr. Clark Trammell.
I respectfully pass.
Anybody else wishing to speak in the public hearing with regards to this issue? We are currently addressing the CID for this project. Anybody else wishing to speak? And third and last time, anybody else wishing to speak? Seeing none at this point in time, the public hearing is now closed. We will now proceed on a conversation on the ordinance. Any questions that the body has? What is the pleasure of the body? Yes. We have a motion for approval by Councilman Cohen, a second by Councilman Jensen. Additional discussion or questions? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item B, if the clerk would read.
B is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout determining the advisability of issuing industrial revenue bonds of the City of Topeka, Kansas for the purpose of financing the construction, reconstruction, renovation, improvement, equipping, and furnishing of commercial facilities located in said city and authorizing the execution of related documents.
City Manager.
I'll again at this point recognize Deputy City Manager Gerber to comment on this item.
Governing body, good evening again. I think Ferd set the stage pretty well for this agenda item, so I won't belabor it too much, but he's accurate in the history in that, excuse me, the TIF statute does allow for a sales tax base of the city's choosing. The developer originally came in with a $0 base. We pushed back on that because we'd heard, I think, pretty clearly from you that you were not receptive to that, and so we have the base as established in the development agreement of $7 million. Again, in lieu of that, the developer has requested an IRB, which as part of the IRB statute, you're allowed to do a sales tax exemption on construction materials. We're estimating that this will be about a $650,000 incentive. As Ferd noted, most of that goes to the state. If you think about the sales tax in Topeka of 9.15, the state is 70% of that, 6.5, and so a large piece of that will be essentially a state exemption. I would point you in the resolution to both Section 5, which talks about what is specifically being asked for, and that's a sales tax exemption, and then Section 6, which talks about the liability of the city, which I'll summarize it for you, and that is zero. Believe it or not, I tend to do most of the economic development incentives and discussions that we have, but I'm far from an expert at this. In fact, in my 20-year career, I've never done an IRB sales tax exemption. But fortunately, we have a lot of smart people on our team who have, and so I will point out Shawnee County native Kevin Cowan in the audience, who is also our bond counsel with Gilmore and Bell, and then Adam Pope from Columbia Capital, and they could both answer any procedural questions you have far better than I. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the council? Seeing no questions, what is the pleasure of the body? Councilman Cohen. We have a motion for approval. We have by Councilman Cohen, a second by Councilmember Jensen. We have a motion and a second. We're open for discussion if there are any questions. Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes, Mr. Emerson voting no.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout setting the public hearing for consideration of the adoption of a redevelopment project plan for the Sherwood Crossing Redevelopment District.
City Manager or Deputy City Manager.
Yes, Deputy City Manager will cover this one as well. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, governing body, as you know, governments love our procedures and processes. Part of the procedure and processes regarding a TIF is that a governing body cannot hear about a project plan, formally approve or disapprove of it until 30 days after the Planning Commission of said city approves that project plan. So last night's Planning Commission meeting, they unanimously approved both the project plan for Sherwood Crossing and the PUD with, as I understand, a very little comment or question, favorably pushed it forward. And so with that in mind, as Ferd explained, if we waited the 30 days, that puts a large gap between council meetings. Obviously, 30 days from now is mid-July. After the July 16th council meeting, there's not a council meeting until August 13th for a developer. Time is money, and that will slow down the project by a month. And so we'd rather not do that. And so we're asking to have a special meeting to consider the TIF project plan. It's my understanding that a date and time that's been thrown out is July 19th, which I believe is a Friday. At 11:30. If you'll notice, so you will need to act on that, because if you'll notice in the resolution, that particular space is blank. So the body will need to set that time and date this evening. Thank you.
So I know that we have to set a public hearing, but I think that procedurally, wouldn't it be the best to start deciding on the resolution before we go into the public hearing?
The date.
All we do is set the date.
Say the date. Okay, so Councilman Jensen.
I will be out of town that Friday,
You as well.
Mayor, me as well, yes. I also had a second concern, though. While we don't typically get a lot of public input during these hearings, that's going to be tough in the middle of a Friday for some people. If there are people who want to come speak, I worry about that. It's, like I said, it's immaterial to me because I'm not going to be here that day.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
I too had that concern, and then my next question is, I have to check my calendar to see where I'll be at, court-wise, but is that all we're gonna discuss, is that hearing, or is that what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Councilwoman Ortiz, yes, that would be the only agenda item for that meeting.
I can't support this right now, not the date, because I'd have to check my calendar.
So we have 3 members. Yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
I was going to ask how many people we need. There was a chance I wouldn't be here, but probably not too late. How many do we need?
7.
7 in favor, 7 voting.
7 in favor voting. City Manager?
What I would suggest is we need to pick a time, and we need to do that tonight, because that was part of the resolution, is to set a date and time. So we need to figure out what that is in order to be able to move forward with this particular item.
By us doing so, does it bind the council to that date, or could we send another public hearing once we figure out what the date is, that the council members are going to be available? Because that's the concern that I have.
Madam Mayor, if you call a hearing for that date, there does need to be a hearing. You could open the hearing and then continue it, as we've done with some in the past. But there would at least need to be that step taken.
Or if there was no quorum present, then a new date would be picked. And I have the power to be able to call another meeting date, but for purposes of this, we need to establish at least a target date, and if we have to move from that, then we do so.
Councilman Cohen?
Bird.
Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, July 19th, is that pretty much the last date that we were able to do something, or?
No, that was the first date.
Okay.
They would qualify for the 30 days, and hearing the discussion, we'd much rather wait till the following Tuesday, for example, the 22nd, than have 7 people show up and 5 vote yes, 2 vote no, and the whole thing has to start over again, or we go home. So for purpose of the public hearing, I would be a little concerned about setting a date, hoping we get quorum, hoping we meet it that day on a Friday at 11:30, they have a real vote the next couple days. I would much rather prefer if the following Tuesday, and realize it's the 4th Tuesday when you're not normally in session, but likely it would maybe cover some of the concerns of council members and Councilwoman Ortiz about the public having noticed that Tuesday, same time, Tuesday, 6 o'clock, it doesn't slow us down that much. Versus August 13th, it does slow us down. We realize this is an extra request, but I'll make my way to Topeka whatever time you guys say. It's just, we want to make sure that that statutory deadline's there, and, we'd like to have as many people here as possible, because we need, an absent vote is a no vote. So, I can presume what anybody's voting, but I'd like the opportunity for as many people to be here to possibly vote yes.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. On August the 6th, I know we put in the primary because we used to have primary, if you were running and you were, trying to get people to the polls, and so the primary was very important, but we don't have that anymore. So I would like to propose that we do it on August the 6th, and that's the only thing that we do at 6 o'clock. Because none of us have a primary that is running. And then those of us that want to get there or look at whatever, like I said, that was put in because when different ones were running, we used to have meetings. And I thought that was so silly because we were trying to figure that out, trying to get out of the meeting, trying to get people to the polls. So I would make the motion to, if that's appropriate, Lisa, to change that date to August 6th, and that special meeting to August 6th at 6 o'clock.
So,
Councilmember Ortiz, right now the date's blank, so there's no date in there. I don't know if there's any input from the developer on the August 6th date or how that works for them, but you could put that in there.
I think it would be good because there's nothing there. It's an evening and they're needing it and.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. It's open for discussion. And what I understand is that the weeks, because of the length of the construction, if we are able to do it any earlier, like on the 22nd, which is the week after, it cuts off 2 weeks of construction in the winter. So they're trying to get the project complete before the winter comes, which is, I think, what I understand the time constraint is.
Correct.
So is that not going to work, is what you're saying?
It would take 2 weeks of construction time, because they can't break ground until this is approved.
Madam,
Councilman Lesser.
the only other thing I would point out is my schedule being that I thought we were off the 6th, I had already made plans for that time. I can be available the 22nd, but the 6th I'm out of the country.
Councilman Jensen.
What is the earliest we could hold this public hearing?
The 19th.
July 19th.
Is there,
Councilwoman Heller.
is there any way we can, I mean, I know we can do waivers of our own rules, but in this case, it's state law, 30 days. Is there any way we can just do it on the 16th?
I don't think there's if I may, there's not a waiver of the 30 days. The only potential waiver with travel, that was one of my concerns when we talked to staff about this, would be maybe you could waive the regular orders of city where you require presence to be voted to vote as opposed to a call-in vote, for example. I've seen that happen in lots of cities and lots of TIF commissions, but I don't think it happens here. So that would, I think you would have that prerogative to waive Robert's Rules of Orders or waive the city rules. That I defer to the city attorney, but the statute cannot be waived.
Councilman Heller.
Well, I think that's something to consider. I personally don't, at this point, we had one person from the public who could come at 11:30 who had a comment possibly on the SID. This we have discussed publicly and have all taken quite a bit of public input. So to wrap it up at a midday meeting doesn't concern me as much as doing something else. If it's possible to waive so we can do call-ins for those of us that already can be out, maybe that's the best solution to move it along. I'm comfortable either way. I just.
Councilman Jensen.
The 22nd? It's a Monday.
Well,
Monday.
the day that we were thinking is the 23rd, because it would already be a Tuesday that is already a regular, it's the day that we typically would be here, even though it's the Tuesday that we would not be here, because it's the 4th Tuesday of the month. Okay. But it would be a short meeting, and it would be a one-item meeting at 6 o'clock, so that people can come.
What if we just move the meeting from the 16th to the 23rd?
Are you proposing that as a friendly amendment?
Second.
Yes, that would be the amendment, to move the meeting from the 16th to the 23rd.
What do we got on the agenda?
Okay, so that would be the Tuesday right after
See what's on the calendar.
is able. Is there a consensus from the body?
City manager's checking his.
Yeah, city manager, she's checking.
We don't have a meeting that day. So
No, we don't. We don't. So it would be at 6 o'clock, the
Yeah, I
same
was
time
just
of the
looking,
city.
Nothing was date dependent on the 16th, so we can do that.
We can do that. Okay, so that being the case, we have a friendly amendment, and it's been seconded by the person that made the original motion. I think we could call it a substitute motion.
And is there anybody who would be gone?
He would be gone.
Yeah, but if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
I think I've been hopefully transparent with you gentlemen. I support the SID, and I always have, but I'm a no vote anyway on the TIF, so you're not losing much if I'm not here, so.
Okay, so we have, thank you for the discussion and for the willingness to have this conversation. We have a motion and a second for a meeting on the 23rd at 6 p.m. in these chambers for a public hearing. I just want to make sure that we're all clear.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
No, no public hearing. We're moving the entire meeting, including any additional action that would need to be brought forward.
Correct. Thank you. On the 23rd at 6 o'clock. Just want to make sure that everybody knows what we're voting on. Okay, so we proceed by voting.
All right, we have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. All right, so now we move on to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, do we do no, because we moved everything, including the resolution?
Point of order.
Yeah, you amended.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes. So at this point in time, we are going to move on the resolution that has now the date on, thank you, procedural. So do we have any questions with regards to the resolution with the current date? So what's the pleasure of the body? We have a motion to move to approve the resolution by Councilman Cohen, a second by Councilman Jensen. Any comments or questions on the item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Okay, we have 9 yes, Mr. Emerson voting no.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item 8. If the clerk would read.
D is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing the initiation of condemnation proceedings to acquire a fee title for construction of the Grant Jefferson Pump Station, Project T291061.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight we have before you an ordinance that will initiate the condemnation proceedings for a piece of property we need for the Grant Jefferson Pump Station. The item was presented and discussed in the past, and we also have Braxton Copley, Deputy Director of Utilities, is available if there are questions.
What is the pleasure of the body? Are there questions or? We have a motion for approval by Councilman Cohen, a second by Councilmember Padilla. Additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item E, if the clerk would read.
E is an update on progress of the Policy and Finance Committee related to evaluation and review of the city's personnel code.
Okay, Councilmember, I think it's Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to see if I could find the document real quick. This year, I'm the chair of the Policy and Finance Committee, and we were given quite a challenge of working on the personnel code because many of the items in the personnel code were already addressed in other areas of administrative regulations and rules and regulations and things like that. And so what had happened is, since a lot of this language was still left over from the strong mayor form of government before we had a city manager form of government. So our city attorney staff took it upon themselves, and they trudged through that. It took like about a year to go through the whole code. This little piece, where does it apply? We found it over here. It also applies here and here. And they pointed out all the references. And I think that's kind of where we're at. Do you want to kind of tell us what else went on?
Yeah, actually, Councilmember Cohen gave a pretty good overview of what we've been doing. So it's been a monumental task, but the committee has hung in there with us. We've had 6 meetings already, and we've got 2 more scheduled in July. So we're continuing progress.
So at this point, it's just a report? And
That's
just,
what it is today.
okay, so there is no action to be taken other than to say that you're going to continue doing a report
Correct.
after the meetings, okay?
Yep.
So we don't have to make a motion to approve the report. So, all right. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
We now move on to item F, if the clerk would read.
F is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp to decide settlement of labor agreement and pass with the ASME Council 61 Local 1294 Water Division.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight I'd like to make a few comments to start off this discussion. Last week we conducted the fact-finding hearing and had a lot of information that was presented by both sides and a lot of questions from the governing body members related to the issues that were presented. After that meeting, later in the week, I began discussions with members of the bargaining unit to look at the possibility of the items that were proposed briefly at one point by Councilman Lesser regarding the possible changes, accepting a portion of the fact finders and also accepting a portion of the city's exhibits as they were presented. Through that discussion, we agreed that we would look at making Exhibit 1 continue as the city had presented, making Exhibit C as the city had presented, but making Exhibit B move to 17% as the total wage increase over the life of the contract. Through a lot of discussion and deliberation, we came to the conclusion to agree to that would be something worth pursuing. I, however, do not have the authority, it wasn't given to me by the governing body, to approve such a wage increase at 17%. Through our different processes about pursuing this contract, you had given me the authority to go to 11.5%. So even though I have basic agreement, I don't have the authority to complete that agreement. So I bring that information to you to understand the position of where the union is at and where we're at. We know this impacts our budget with our operating budget, but we will manage that within the budget and attempt to continue to complete projects that we have on the docket and move forward from this point with changes to the pay wage scale as they're presented. So that's where we're at, Mayor, governing body.
All right. We have had ample discussion. We have heard from both sides. We have received supporting information that has been requested. So I think that at this point in time, the appropriate thing would be to consider whether there's a motion on the floor so that we could continue to have discussion after that motion, or if you would like to have discussion prior to making a motion. Councilwoman Clear.
So are we doing one at a time? Is that what we're deciding, or have we already decided that?
What we would look at, if you had a change that you wanted to make, that you would make a motion to amend that exhibit, and each exhibit that you would want to amend, a council member would want to amend, have a vote on amending that exhibit, and then eventually make a motion to accept the resolution with the amended exhibits.
So the two that you both agreed on was which ones?
Exhibit A and Exhibit C.
Okay. So I would move to approve Exhibit A.
Okay.
Actually, if you wanted to, if there was someone that wanted to change Exhibit B, the right way would be to make a motion to change Exhibit B, if that's the only one that anyone wants to change. Get approval of that first, and then make a motion to approve the resolution, which would be all the exhibits. So if you want to change one of the exhibits, let's make a motion to amend that exhibit and then have a vote on that. And part of that purpose is in our procedures, we don't want to vote on the whole thing until we've made the changes to the parts, because if we couldn't get agreement on the amendment to the one exhibit, we could seek a second motion to make a change to that amendment without killing the whole proposal.
So Deputy Mayor, would you like to change your motion?
I withdraw my motion.
You withdraw your motion. Okay. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to make a motion to move to amend Exhibit B, which is attached to the resolution, by changing the 4.5% increase effective December 15th, 2018 to a 9% increase, and by changing the 2.5% increase effective December 14th, 2019 to a 3.5% increase.
We have heard the motion. Is there a second?
That amendment is going around in writing for you if you'd like to look at it.
Okay, we all have the motion in our hand. Is there a second so that we could have discussion?
Second.
We have a second by Councilman Emerson. Now we're open to discussion on this item. Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may ask a question of Councilman Lesser. It's 9%, then 3.5%. That's, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you're basically putting the 2018 and 2019 together then, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I've troubled with this. I have been really proud that we have worked our process better than we have in the past in terms of staff asking council for some guidance before they enter into the negotiations and getting some direction about wages, benefits, flexibility. And the understanding was, not just with this one, but with others as well, that council was concerned about raising taxes or fees, and to please hold the line. And up until the very end, the staff had done that and even double-checked, and it was a good back and forth. They followed that guidance, and also, you know, we had their back behind it. We had each other's. There was mutual support in moving it as far as it went. The information that we got when we got this material a week or two ago was that the difference between those two proposals is over roughly $200,000 a year, which is a lot of money, especially if the trade-off is either raising fees more than we had expected, which was already 5% in the future, or having to not do utility projects as planned to cover the money. You know, $200,000 a year is $1 million in 5 years, and it actually ends up being more than that because it's cumulative. So I thought that we've done a pretty good job for all concerned. I asked for some information about the wage levels, and it looks like the minimum starting wage now is about $15 an hour, and most people are getting, for a variety of positions, somewhere in the neighborhood of the upper teens or to the mid-20s now. So people are making $38,000 to $50,000 or more in their wages already. I just wanted to lay that out. I'm concerned about the work that staff did so well up until now, and what it would mean to our ratepayers and to the needs that we have for utility repairs if we were to do other than go with the management's recommendation to us. So.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
So the fact finder's recommendation for wages was 17. So if we do a 9 and a 3.5, it's 12.5, and then was 2020 4.5?
City Manager.
One of the things as you look at that, you got to remember is that there are 3-step increases that each employee would receive in a 3-year period, which are 1.5%. So when you look at that chart, there's 4.5% that's not included on there as a wage increase because that's part of their step system that they have.
So it'll be a total of 17.
So that's where the other 4.5% lies.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilwoman Hiller.
Just as a point with the math, with those step increases, then the 4.5 and the 2.5 is still over a 10% increase over the course of the 3 years. Be a fairly sizable chunk if we've agreed to go ahead and backdate to the beginning of the year and use the 2018 as well. When when the agreement hits and people get that first paycheck, which would be a substantial raise in the base pay as well as a catch-up check.
Thank you for your comments. Additional questions? Seeing none? Oh, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know what the appropriate time is to offer this, but, you know, one of the things that has really troubled me, first of all, I absolutely support raises for these gentlemen. I've worked with a lot of these guys over the years. They're hardworking, and when you go out and it's, you know, 10 degrees in the middle of winter,
Yeah.
I mean, we can't pay them enough. That said, I know we have to be fiscally responsible, but one of the things that has troubled me is we have the second shift thing, but when you look at the math or the figures that staff provided, the second shift, those 6 months only count for 56% of the overtime. And if you think about it, 6 months of the year should be, if it was equally distributed, it would be 50% already. So there's hardly any difference in those months as the other months. That said, going to a second shift year-round would give management the flexibility, you know, to use it. Not all years are the same as far as weather. We have sometimes when December it's 60 degrees, and sometimes in, you know, December it's 10 degrees. So there's sometimes, I'm troubled both with the months that we have, but more so, as was brought up in here, last week we heard story after story of people working more than 24 hours during times of high breaks. And it just seems, if a large portion of this is about safety, then why only have these 6 months carved out artificially? So I am in support of Councilman Lesser's proposal if we can also amend the second shift to allow management to do it year-round as needed only. So again, I don't know when the appropriate time is to say that, but I wanted to put that out there, that's going to take care of some of this extra.
So I take it that this would be a friendly amendment to Councilmember Lesser's, no?
We should do Exhibit B
First, and then vote on the
We really
second
should.
shift?
And unfortunately, that's where the process would work best, because that's in a different exhibit with what we're talking on. We really need to address Exhibit B's language first, based on the amendment that was proposed.
Okay, well, again, I would support this if we can, you know, some of the savings and especially the safety enhancements of having a second shift year-round, so.
The other alternative would be if that motion was withdrawn for a period of time, you make your motion on Exhibit A, see where that vote comes out, and then you can revote. But that would be in the correct order if his vote's reliant on what happens with.
I'm fine with that.
You're okay with withdrawing your motion? Okay, so at this point in time, we have a motion withdrawal, so are you making that as a motion for Exhibit A?
Yes, I am, Mayor, and hold on, I have it very eloquent written out by our city attorney. So basically, my motion I move to amend Exhibit A, which is attached to the proposed resolution, by deleting the words during the months of January, February, June, July, August, and September from the first full sentence of Section 2, Paragraph C.
So we have a motion, do we have a second? We have a second by Councilman Padilla. We're open for discussion at this point in time. Deputy Mayor.
Wasn't there last week some wording that was in discussion for this exhibit?
There was, regarding discussion between the city and the union related to the work rules and how this would function. And so that was a part of it. And through our discussions with the union, we made agreements that we would work through those types of situations, continue to allow them the opportunity to meet and confer and have those discussions on how they would need to function, not having them lose their ability to grieve if there was a particular issue that was a grievable issue related to how it was functioning.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Additional comments or questions with regards to this item? Okay, we have a motion for Exhibit A to amend the language so that rather than it being according to the ones that were presented, second shift year-round, so the staff would have the flexibility to make changes to the schedule based on the needs. So seeing no additional comments, we proceed by voting.
Okay, we have 9 yes. Councilmember Mays voting no.
Okay, 9 having voting yes, that motion passes. So at this time, I think that we're going back to Exhibit B. Councilmember Lesser, I would like to recognize you.
Do I need to restate the motion?
Do you want to restate?
Councilmember Lesser's motion was seconded by Emberson to amend Exhibit B by changing 4.5% increase effective December 15, 2018 to a 9% increase, and by changing the 2.5% increase effective December 14, 2019 to a 3.5% increase.
Okay, Councilmember Lesser, made a motion. Councilman Emerson has made a second. This point in time, we have already had discussion on this item, but if there is a need for additional questions or discussion, seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. Now move on to Exhibit C. City Manager.
Well, you approved both exhibits. Now we need a motion to approve the resolution, which has all exhibits as amended.
So moved.
We have a motion by Councilmember Lesson. Do we have a second? We have a second by Councilmember Jensen. So at this point in time, what we're looking at is the only 2 items that were amended were item A's and B's. C is as presented. Do we have comments or questions with regards to this item now that we have a motion and a second? Councilwoman Heller.
Just a clarification for those that maybe are watching. So these were the 3 items that went all the way through the impasse that we are having to vote on unilaterally. And the rest of the contract will come back to us.
Correct.
Because all that's been negotiated, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions or discussion on this item? Oh, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Before we vote, I just want to say thank you to WPC for all their hard work that they do daily, not just in the winter months. And I'm glad that we can come to some type of resolution, because as we sit in these chairs, we realize the work that you do, and it's tough, but we also have a budget that we have to confer with. So we want to thank you for helping us get to that mediocre, even though it's a week later. And thank you for all that you do. It has not gone unnoticed. Even when my water is about to get cut off and they call me and say, Sylvia, you better get on the phone and pay it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we hope that you will see that we're trying to do the best that we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were moving your hand.
Yeah.
Councilman Emerson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just, and water as well. So you guys, you got to do on that.
Okay, so we now proceed with voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. Have to go back off my agenda.
Budget.
We now move on to item G in the agenda, if the clerk would read.
G is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout determining the advisability of a sales tax exemption in connection with the issuance by the City of Topeka, Kansas of its Industrial Revenue Bond Sunflower Foundation Project, Series 2019, for the purpose of financing the acquisition, construction, renovation, furnishing, and equipping of certain nonprofit healthcare, educational, and resource facilities in the city.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, I'll have Deputy City Manager.
City Manager, could we allow for a minute while they exit the room? Because I think that the sound, at least I'm having issues hearing. Okay, thank you, City Manager. I am so sorry. Could you please repeat
Right.
yourself?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we have before you a request for another IRB approval. This was received late. We apologize for that. That's when it came in. Deputy City Manager sent a specific email to help explain the issues, and so I'll turn it over to him for additional comments.
Governing body, I don't have much more to add regarding the IRB process than what was discussed previously in this meeting. This is a request for a sales tax exemption on construction-related materials for the Sunflower Foundation's project that the governing body approved earlier this year. Again, as the city manager said, apologize for the lateness of this request, but we try to make sure we keep things moving as best we can, and when this came in, we felt, given the general level of support from the body, that we felt comfortable putting this on the agenda. Once again, if you have procedural questions, I would note that Kevin Cowan, bond counsel, is in the audience for anything specific.
So does the body have any questions, discussion?
I have a question. Could you just remind us what this project was and, what that was for again?
Councilman Cohen, this is for the Sunflower Foundation, and it's to expand or construct, their headquarters, basically the old Menninger Hill area of North Topeka.
Okay.
It's about a $10 million project.
Mm-hmm.
Should we do those buildings? Okay. Additional comments? Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Gerber, is this, I guess a couple of questions. First of all, do you know why this is coming so late in the game? Didn't we approve these like a year ago or something like that?
Councilman Emerson, you did approve IRB tax abatement piece of the project, and I believe it was the first meeting in February. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure it's February this year. And then it was recently requested from the Sunflower Foundation to do this particular piece of the IRB process. And very truthfully, we had to kind of look at our policy and procedures to see what applied and what didn't. And so that caused a bit of the delay as well.
I'm very much in support of the project, but I'm not in support of this, and I'll tell you why. They're not going to pay any taxes once, they're tax exempt once they're here. And if this is not going to make or break the project, I would love to see that Topeka get something for sales tax out of this project. So therefore, I'm not going to be supporting this, but appreciate staff bringing it up.
Additional discussion on this item? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug, did they not know about this when we did all that the first time when we approved this, or?
Councilwoman Ortiz, honestly, I don't know. I wasn't particularly involved in the beginning of this process. I do think there are some folks from Sunflower Foundation here. I noticed they snuck in during the commotion, so you might, if we could call them up, they'd be able to address that.
Thank you. Yes, we can clarify that. I'm Billie Hall. I'm President and CEO of the Sunflower Foundation. Cheryl Bean is the Chief Financial Officer for the foundation. So let us explain why this is coming back to you the second time. Do you want to do that, Cheryl?
I would appreciate that. I don't know, does it matter? Okay, thank you. The project that we have been undertaking has been probably longer than what we anticipated from the beginning. We're a small staff. This project has taken some different turns that we weren't expecting. So we actually first came to the city in, I believe it was December of 2017. And at the time, the the IRB was handled through Mr. Wolf with Nichols and Wolf, I believe. And so there was conversation with him at the time that there would be an opportunity to apply for a sales tax exemption. Unfortunately, our project came to a halt, and a year later, when we came back, Gilmore and Bell was then the counsel for the IRB process. So I think that there was a series of opportunities that were missed, if that's fair. We're new to this. This is a new process for us. We've never been through a project of this magnitude. So unfortunately, I think that we knew that there was an opportunity. We did not understand the process. So that's the reason for the significant delay.
Councilman Lister. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that sums it up. There was a time period between bond counsel of Mr. Wolf and Kevin and new to this project, it kind of slipped between the cracks. It was not one of those things that was anticipated. I've had some conversations. They're very good at what they do, but they are not construction managers, and neither am I. So through that process, I think there was something that was lost in there. And that was my understanding as well.
Councilman Emerson.
And I'm sorry I didn't catch your names, but I want to let you know I'm totally supportive of you guys and your organization in this project. It's just simply when you sit in these seats, all the demands day after day for funding for different departments or for nonprofits and stuff, it's just tough. And so anyway, please don't think it's anything against you guys, but thank you.
What is the pleasure of the body? If this Deputy Mayor.
Move to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Deputy Mayor. We have a second by Councilman Lesser. Additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 8 yes, Mr. Emerson and Mr. Mays voting no.
8 having voting yes, the motion passes. At this point, we move on to the non-action items. If the clerk would read.
A is discussion on the 2020 City of Topeka operating budget.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ask Nick to come forward. For us tonight, this is an important just start of the discussion. I guess we can say we've started a couple of times, but this is the more serious part, where we get down to really beginning to lay out the details of the proposed budget for 2020. These types of things take a long lead-up time to this point, so for us, this is a bit of a celebration that we're here now to present this. However, we know there's still work to be done, so tonight we'll have an overview, and then tomorrow night we'll begin to go through the detail with you. And so we look forward to that opportunity. But first, we want to make sure we're covering it in a general, overall way for individuals to understand where we're at with this budget. So with that, Nick? Oh, Jessica, my apologies, I forget that. Yes, Jessica Lemondola, please, Director.
Well, thank you again for letting us present this evening. I'll handle just a broad overview, and then I'll have Nick transition into the more specific discussions about the 2020 budget. And just thank you for everyone taking the time before this meeting, giving some questions and some thought, and I know over the next couple months you'll have many more, but we look forward to having that engagement. So tonight we're going to talk about the overall budget goals, the broad budget challenges that we faced, and then Nick will move into more specific general fund revenue and expense items, cover just some of the more basic, larger other funds, and then discuss the actual budget book construction so that you can have a little bit of an idea of how to go through the budget book, and then finally timeline and next steps. So So the two major goals or priorities that kind of drove us through the budget process, one, we wanted to make sure that we were doing our best to support the budget priorities that were established by this governing body back in, I believe, April. Those include invest in infrastructure, continue the commitment to public safety, continue the commitment to developing neighborhoods, be selective and strategic about our investment towards quality of life, and then also continue to improve the fiscal sustainability. The second major goal that city manager asked us to focus on was to present a balanced budget that supports current service levels. And at the end of this initial process, we believe the budget that we've presented to you tonight that you have will support these two overarching goals. And I just want to highlight that the budget process wasn't an easy process. It gets difficult and more difficult and more difficult as we go through the years. But we do think this budget accomplishes these two goals. So with that said, some of the major budget challenges that we face is this will be the 6th consecutive budget that does not include a mill levy rate increase. Property tax in the general fund makes up over 1/3 of our revenue. So obviously over time, that growth pattern doesn't keep pace. So since 2014, revenue has grown on average approximately 0.7% annually, while our expenditure growth pattern outpaces that revenue. And it's not indicative of any underlying poor decision making. At the end of the day, the city's government is largely personnel. And over 6 years, people make more money. The vast majority are governed by unions. Those union contracts include raises. And then outside of personnel costs, health insurance tends to go up, commodities go up, just the overall buying power of the dollar from 2014 is unable to purchase the same items today. So on average, our expenditures is up 2.4% annually. At the same time, CPI is about 1.5% on average annually. So you can see that as your revenue pattern starts slowing down, your expenditures continue to grow. So in 2014, there was a concerted effort to focus on financial stability, put more money into reserves, offset just the normal risks that governments run in terms of finance annually. We were able to invest more in capital maintenance, capital infrastructure. But since 2014, without that additional revenue growth supporting it, we start to have to cut around the edges. So we've cut out capital spending from the operating budget. This will be the 3rd consecutive year, not all capital spending, but the big projects. But this will be the 3rd consecutive year we're unable to fund the cash funding that was in the CIB. So at the end of the year, when we achieve a surplus, as we will target and ask our departments to be very strategic in their spending, that will be our first priority. So at this time, we'll move on into the general fund revenue discussion, but I just want to really highlight that the budget process is not an easy process. So we've provided a budget that we think addresses your concerns and the city's needs with limited impact on services, but the decisions get harder and harder, and the departments and more importantly, our city residents will start to feel more and more the impact of the revenue not keeping pace with our overall expenditure growth. So I'll go ahead and turn it on over to Nick, and he can speak more about the general fund.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the governing body. Tonight, I'm going to walk through just kind of a high-level overview of the general fund and some of our other funds, and then preview the next couple months of discussion that we'll have on the 2020 operating budget. So looking at general fund revenue, it's $96.5 million. That's a 1.9% increase over the 2019 adopted budget. Our revenue forecast for 2020 reflect prior year collections as well as trends that we are seeing in the current year. So I'm going to talk about property tax and sales tax in the next couple of slides, but now I'll just highlight a couple of our other revenue sources. So pilots are payment in lieu of taxes and franchise fees. Those increase a little over $1 million from the 2019 adopted budget. Conversely, on municipal court, which are our fines and fees from court rulings, we've actually reduced that budget by $500,000 from $3 million down to $2.5 million. That's reflecting just what we've seen in the last few years of collections. We're being more, we're refining our forecast and think that that's what we're going to collect in the next year. But the primary revenue sources in the general fund that make up 2/3 are property tax and sales tax. So on property tax, as Finance Director mentioned, we are expecting a flat mill levy rate on our property taxes. So there are two ways to grow property taxes. One is a growth in assessed valuation. The other is in increasing the mill levy rate. Under the general fund, we're seeing a 1% assessed valuation growth. Those are estimates that we receive from the county each year in June. And so for 2020 over 2019, we're expecting a 1% growth there. As part of balancing the general fund budget, we have 3 tax levy supported funds. We have the general fund, which is the primary user of those those mills, and then but we also have the special liability and debt services funds that collect revenue from the mill levy as well. So for 2020, we are proposing shifting just a little over $500,000 from the debt service and the special liability fund into the general fund, but overall we are proposing to keep the same mill levy rate overall. So if you look, the chart you have in front of you shows the 2019 final mill rate and the proposed for 2020. Both are 39.7, so no increase there. On the sales tax side, again, that is the largest single source of revenue in the general fund. We've seen an alternating pattern over the last 5 years of growth and decline. We've talked about in the last couple of quarterly meetings or quarterly presentations with you about we've seen the decline over 2018. I think we were seeing that 2018 was a pretty robust year. It was a little over 2% increase in sales tax, which is really good for this community. And so we're projecting a little bit of a decline this year, and then hoping and anticipating a bounce back next year. So 2020 represents a 1.4 increase over our 2019 projected sales tax, but from a budget perspective, it's actually a 1% reduction from what we've budgeted in the past couple of years. On the expenditure side, so this, again, $96.5 million. We present a balanced budget each year on the general fund side. That's, again, a 1.9% increase. The chart you see in front of you is kind of giving you a preview of how we're going to address the next 2 public budget work sessions. We're going to be framing the discussion by the council priority area. And so you can see here in the general fund, not unlike a lot of other communities, especially in the Midwest, you see public safety take up a pretty good chunk of the general fund, about 3/4 of the total budget. That includes our police, fire, and municipal court departments. And then you see a fairly even mix amongst the other priority areas in the general fund. Major expenditure categories on the general fund include personnel-related expenses. That actually represents the largest expenditure category in the general fund at 79% of the total budget. That's a 2.5% increase over the 2019 adopted budget. That includes contracted wage increases, an increase of 1% for non-union employees, and also factors in anticipation of a more fully staffed police department. In the 2020 year, we have a couple classes this year. I think 15 and 17 are the last numbers that I remember hearing on that. So we're anticipating that, going into next year, we'll have a more fully staffed police department. And so in the past several years, we've budgeted vacancy credits that account for just the natural vacancies that we have throughout the year. And so we're lowering that estimate in 2020 to account for what we think will be just a more fully funded or more fully staffed department. As part of balancing the budget, we eliminated 3 vacant positions in the general fund. So 1 position in finance, an office administrative assistant position, an emergency management project manager in the executive department, and a surveyor's assistant in the public works department. Again, all 3 of those positions were vacant when we reduced those. As part of non-personnel budget, so this is at least the 3rd consecutive year that we've asked departments to submit a flat non-personnel budget. For 2020, with all general fund supported departments, we requested a 3% reduction scenario. That was based off of both personnel and non-personnel from the 2019 adopted budget. That total request was $2.8 million. In order to balance the budget, we applied about $1 million of those reductions in the budget. That includes reduction in overtime expenses, shifts in personnel to other funds, postponement of capital purchases, and as previously mentioned, the reduction of those 3 vacant positions. As the finance director mentioned, this will be the 3rd straight year that we have not budgeted the general fund cash capital portion from the 2020 or from the capital improvement plan. Again, those are first priority as surplus funds become available through the year. So we'll get into more detail on the expenditure budget, particularly tomorrow with most of our general fund departments, and we'll walk through each of those departments tomorrow and next Tuesday. Looking at the other funds, so our sales tax driven funds, which are primarily the citywide half-cent sales tax and the countywide half-cent sales tax, continue to focus on the council goal of improving the pavement condition index and other infrastructure needs. Utilities reflects the 3rd year of rate increases adopted by the governing body in December of 2017. So for the water, wastewater, and storm utility, that will be a 5% increase in 2020. Our internal service funds that support operations in the city, fleet facilities and information technology, we requested that they provide a flat operational budget overall. And so that is reflected in the budget. And then our property tax levy supported funds with the reduced mill rate, we talked about shifting those mills from the debt service and special liability funds. We expect and fully expect that those will continue to support regular operations even at that reduced mill rate. And so, during the capital discussions earlier this year, we talked a lot about the borrowing limit on the general obligation bonds. So this budget incorporates that discussion. We believe that with the mill rate proposed, that we will fully fund those operations in 2020 and beyond. So looking ahead to the next couple of weeks, we're going to be walking through the budget book with you, and so you should have a copy of that with you. If not, we will make sure to get that to you as soon as possible. I believe we dropped it off at the council offices on Monday, so we'll make sure to get that to you if you have not received that yet. But it includes the city manager's transmittal letter, which is really talking about the highlights that we've discussed tonight. And then it has a budget overview that has a summary of revenue and expenditures across the city. And then the bulk of the book focuses on those department budgets. And so, again, as we've previewed a couple of times with you, we're going to be going through by council priority area to try and highlight the discussion around what you as a governing body wanted to see in the budget. And so tomorrow night, we'll discuss the areas of public safety, improving fiscal sustainability and governance, developing neighborhoods, and quality of life. And then our discussion next Tuesday will focus on our infrastructure priority area, which will include our public works and utilities departments. So each department budget, similar to last year, contains key performance metrics, goals and accomplishments. It has a 4-year budget history for each program and division within the city. And another thing that was introduced last year was changes to the budget section, which attempts to highlight those major changes in the proposed budget. At the end of the book, there is a summary of all the budgeted funds that we have in the city, as well as a 4-year history of adopted budget positions in the city. So again, looking at next steps, so we do have our 2 public budget work sessions, both starting at 6 o'clock at the Law Enforcement Center in Classroom A. So starting tomorrow night, and then continuing next Tuesday, the 25th. We'll continue budget discussions at the July 2nd City Council meeting, and we'll look to have discussions regarding any potential amendments to the budget. And then on July 9th, we'll be setting the maximum taxes levied and publishing the notice of the public budget hearing. At that point, you can still make changes to the budget, but if you want to increase an expenditure or program, you'd have to find a corresponding decrease because you can't go above that budget authority. And then, because there is no meeting the first week of August, proposing to hold the public hearing and the budget adoption on the same night, August 13th. The latest we can submit the budget to Shawnee County is August 23rd, which is a Friday. And so it builds in just a little bit of flexibility in that schedule. So with that, again, we'll go into more detail tomorrow night, but happy to address or take any questions that you have right now in preparation for those discussions.
Questions for Nick or Jessica? Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just compliments and a couple of comments. Thank you. This was really well put together. I think you were listening or zenning the best you can where the council was coming from, and as a starting point, very thoughtful and very well presented. I wanted to compliment you on that. As sort of a challenge to my colleagues, something that caught my eye when I read through the presentation in advance, and Nick mentioned it tonight, was the idea of only giving management 1% increases while the rest of this staff is getting about 2.5%. And I wanted to caution everyone that that's how come we ended up with 7 unions, and how come we have ended up in the past with people who didn't want to get promoted and compression problems. And I think we need to take it on as a challenge to make sure that those folks who are not unionized are getting the same consideration that our labor staff are getting. It's important in tons of ways. And I think we can do it. I just wanted to challenge everybody to be thinking of that as you first look at it. And also, no surprise from me, it's a shame to see moving money out of special liability and the debt service fund that could be used for particularly reducing the number. The idea on the part of staff was that would reduce the capital projects that we would do with cash. I think we can figure it out. Again, it always costs us 50% more in rough figures to borrow, and so that's a direction that I understand why the staff's proposing it at this point, but I think we can figure it out. And in doing that, then, the challenge would be that my understanding is the staff in leadership and then the departments really stepped up and took on that challenge of getting out the red pen and looking at 3% cuts in each department, some possible cuts anyway. Sometimes it's not that simple, and just moving things around or kind of, because that's kind of kicking the can if we're just moving them around. But those small cuts, I would challenge all of us as we look at the budget to look at 6 figures when we're looking at things that from that big picture perspective we could change, do without, economize. I'm not worried about staff positions. We've got great staff and possibilities if we decide to adjust some things. But to look for $1 million, ideally $2 million, that would allow us to put back some of the things that staff has moved at this point and have a robust budget that we can all live well within. Thank you.
Councilman Jessen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to commend you all on bringing us a budget that doesn't have an increase. However, I just want to remind all my colleagues, we're getting to the point where we're going to have to start cutting services. And while I recognize that taxes are hard for folks to pay, not having those services sometimes is even worse, and it goes much less noticed. So not advocating for a tax increase, but there is a balance. It's very delicate. It's extremely critical to consider both sides of not having a tax increase and not being able to provide the services our constituents need and demand versus raising their taxes and taking more of their hard-earned money. So delicate balance. I think you guys have done a fantastic job this year. I'll be interested to see how you did it exactly as we move through the process, but kudos, absolutely.
Deputy Mayor.
Along those lines, I had someone say something really smart to me, and I thought, because I never thought of that. Because if we don't raise taxes this year and we have to raise them next year and it's raised 6 mills, you might want to be careful. Maybe you do 2 now, spread it out over time. Because as she said, as a homeowner and all, I would rather pay a little bit each year than pay a lot. So you might want to think about, it was smart. You might want to think about if we want to raise a little bit this year instead of a lot next year.
I think that one of the things that the community doesn't know, and we've been working with this, is that when the first draft of the budget came along, we were looking at a significant discrepancy. And city manager and the staff at the finance department, we were talking about how are we going to make this happen. And they were things that, when you look at every 13 years, I think, we have an additional pay period. And that in itself was close to $3 million. That's 3 mills. Right there. And we've been trying to figure out how we're going to find those efficiencies. We keep on seeing that every year we have increases of a 2.4 in the expenditures of the city. Most of it is our staff. We just had that discussion today. And I know that we have not had an increase in the mills since when?
2014.
2014. I mean, so when we're having these difficult conversations, whether we have that discussion, that is a very serious discussion to have this year, or whether we have that discussion next year, I think that it's important for us to understand that our citizens are expecting a level of service from us that we're going to have to figure out a way how to partner, because it's tight. And I think that what the staff did this year is short of a miracle. By the reductions that they did and by the changes that they had to do to present to us a flush budget this year. It was something to make sure that we take note of. But I don't know if we could continue this trend for too much longer without having a significant impact on our service delivery. So, additional questions for Nick and Jessica? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation. We look forward to digging into the budget tomorrow. And please, next year, budget is so important, have some balloons.
We did float bringing our children and asking the zoo to bring in an animal and possibly setting something on fire. So maybe tomorrow.
I like your style. I like your style. At this point in time, we move on to the announcements.
Mayor, I think there was somebody signed up to speak, Mr. Ledbetter.
Oh, on this issue? I thought he signed up for
6A.
public comment. 6A, Mr. Ledbetter.
Thank you, governing body. I'm going to do a whirlwind here. The first word I'm going to bring up is ever since 2014, I've been bringing up at budgets the word productivity. And when you have a declining population, which we do in Topeka, it's declining at 600 people a year, you have got to look at productivity. And that means you've got to do more with less. That means you've got to do more with less staff at times. Now, where I do not want to see any cuts is in Topeka Police. and especially that CIT unit, which there's a tremendous need for that mental health unit in this community. It's not that Topeka's unique, but we do have those problems. I never hear problems with the fire department. I never hear problems with the zoo. The problem areas are where we have a front porch in this community. Our streets, how we fix them, or not how we fix them. The impact on our sales tax by having broken streets. The impact on our sales tax, which is not being studied when we have snowstorms and nobody plows the streets for 3 days. These are obvious things to me. Obviously, it would affect your sales tax. So if you're concerned about your sales tax, there are certain areas this city could increase its services much greater. Just the wear and tear on our vehicles and the wear and tear on our public vehicles by not fixing the streets correctly is something that I don't think we have really rationally studied out. I was told by somebody the other day who came from outside the city, he said, I wish code enforcement would do a better job, but he said in defense of some of the homeowners, they probably look at the streets and wish the city would do a better job. And so I said, well, you know, that's a unique perspective, and you're from outside the city. I like hearing that, you know, hearing other perspectives. And it seems to me like both are front porch, and both could do a much better job in their departments of fixing these areas much quicker, especially when you're dealing with commercial buildings on main streets. This is what people see when they come here for Country Stampede. And I sent you pictures earlier this morning of streets that still are in horrible shape just north of the raceway. Maybe they got fixed today. Those pictures were from yesterday. If you want your property values to go up, you've got to deal with the problem of codes. You've got to do that, and then you will see, I believe, your property values going up. They do in neighborhoods where we've suddenly enforced the codes where we didn't, like Highcrest. There has been movement of those property values upward. But for 20 plus years, the codes were not being enforced. And that's testimonial by people who live there. I want to say that one issue that this county or the city does not have under its purview and is also our front porch is our parks. And I am going to be talking to the county a lot about our parks and how much better job we could do with playground equipment for the kids and things that actually make this community look better and make it look a lot more appealing to want to live here. But I think that we need this coming year to focus on productivity, and I also believe that we need to focus on how we are going to get the population growing. And that means development services and planning have got to start giving us some strategies for increasing housing in this community. And it is their role, it's their mission. They're supposed to be doing that, in my opinion. And I want to hear their ideas as to how we're going to do that. Anyway, these are just some of my thoughts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. We now move on to the announcements, if the city clerk would read. City manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Last reminder, Out and About Trout is happening at the Yak and Yarn in Fairlawn Plaza this coming Monday, June 24th at 1 to 5 p.m. Please call my office if you'd like to make an appointment. The proposed budget is now available to the public and can be viewed on the City of Topeka's website on the finance page. The last thing I want to comment on is the work that we're currently doing in our preparations for Kicker Country Stampede. It's been a very whirlwind preparation time. I can tell you the police department working hard with regards to their operations to ensure we have quality law enforcement in place, working with other agencies in order to accomplish that. We'll have fire personnel that will be there. Our emergency management coordinator has been working with various equipment pieces that we'll need and the management that we'll have at that location. Public Works is working on preparations in the areas of fixing our streets in that particular area, along with Neighborhood Relations, working with their inmate crews and others to clean up areas where we can. to make sure that we have a good appearance for our community as we have all these visitors. Along with that, though, I can't forget working with our finance and legal staff to make sure we got the right agreements in place. We understand the financial impact that we'll have to our budget, and also looking forward to seeing what kind of financial impact it has to our revenues. So we'll be looking at those things down the road. I have to also mention, though, we may have some effect in the next month on our court system, depending on what happens at the event. So cannot forget what our court will do once we have completed the event. We obviously thank them for picking and choosing to come here. We're excited to see them in our community, and we hope that they'll be happy with how things go at the event. I want to make sure, though, I show some appreciation to some of our partners. Shawnee County Sheriff, Shawnee County Corrections, Dispatch, our emergency management partners at Shawnee County. We've also got some state partners that are involved, both Kansas Highway Patrol, Kansas DOT, alcoholic beverages is going to be involved. Of course, private partners looking at AMR is going to have a presence out there helping with things that might happen, and Stormont Vale is going to have a presence there as well. So lots of moving pieces. So far, it's coming together well. We're excited. They're starting to place equipment that we'll need to do those operations out there today. And we're just really looking forward to having a smooth running event. Hope the weather is good and everybody is safe.
Thank you, City Manager. I would like to echo those comments of our team coming together so that we could, like Councilman Cohen very well said, roll out the red carpet as we are welcoming guests into our community. So to all of us that see new people into our city, if you notice that people are lost or trying to find their way, just remember there's a major event that's going to be happening in our community. Make sure that we show our best hospitable demeanor, and to all of the businesses, let's make sure that we remember that these are people that are coming into our community anew, a lot of them, and good customer service goes a long way. Sometimes we don't realize how, you know, the cashier in a place may be the first and the only impression that somebody takes of our community. So just remember to be Topeka proud, and remember that we are all Topeka as we are in this process. I want to congratulate the students that participated in the Washburn Leadership Academy last week. I met with the students on Wednesday, and I tell you what, if you're ever concerned about the future of this community, I tell you, fear not, because the students in the city of Topeka are bright, engaged, and they are doing some amazing things. I went to speak with them, and I didn't speak. I said, I want to hear from you, young individuals. What are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And you wouldn't believe the conversations that we had. We talked about mental health. We talked about their concerns about the rising number of suicides that we have and what is holding up people from getting the help. We've lost several teenagers in our school districts. We were talking about things like systemic racism. And these were things that they were bringing up, trying to understand why there's disparities in our community with regards to socioeconomic growth. I mean, it was this really impactful conversation, and I left moved and proud of our young people in our community. So watch out. They're coming. It's awesome. Also want to congratulate the amazing individuals that won today the Women of Excellence at the YWCA. Several wonderful people in our community were recognized, and I want to congratulate them again. And then finally, I know that our chief made the acknowledgement of the tweet during Father's Day. I tried to stay away from the phone, so I finally got it on Monday after I started looking at my Facebook. I think that we tried to respond as quick as we could, but I really appreciate the heart of our chief. And I know that this is a difficult time, but it would have been very easy for the chief to make a statement in writing. It would have been very easy for the chief to just, not face the body and talk to the body. And I think that this is why our community chose Chief Cochran, because he has the heart of a humble servant. And when things are challenging and we're difficult, we stand up and we face those things. And I think that he exemplified those values today. So, City Manager, thank you also for your support in this process, because this has not been a chief and mayor, it's been a triad working together with our community. So I appreciate your support. With that, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. First of all, we had a neighborhood meeting last night over in the Rolling Meadows neighborhood. And I just wanted to thank Dr. Jason Peak, our Public Works Director, was there speaking for about an hour and got some some great comments and got some challenging comments. So I will tell you, I've worked with a number of public works directors over the years here in Topeka, and he's one of the very best I've worked with. So I really appreciate everything you do, Dr. Peak. And secondly, this was a fantastic week for Topeka. I did something on Sunday I've never done before in my life. I watched an entire PGA tournament final round. Okay, whatever it is. It's professional golf. I don't know what it is. But Gary Woodland, a native Topekan and proud to be a native Topekan, won that, and what a class act. So I'd like to thank Mr. Woodland, and it was great to see him after when he was a guy with the Shawnee Heights hat came on, who's actually a Major League Baseball player. I'm going to mess up his name, but Finan, thank you. Also from Topeka, so a great classy guy, and I'm hoping there's going to be some celebration at some point in Topeka.
There's things in the planning.
Fantastic, Mayor. Well, thank you.
I want to thank and acknowledge Scent and their organization for the ribbon cutting that they held this week at their most recent home. It was really a nice turnout to have a lot of people in the neighborhood come out and see this refurbished home that, is soon going to be occupied by a young law student and his wife. So they're going to take over residency there, and it really is in a perfect space right across the street from Betty Phillips Park, which I think gets underutilized and maybe unnoticed. And so hopefully there'll be more people that will take advantage of that park. But Scent has done a great job there. They also had 2 more locations that they've already designed, and they're already breaking ground on the second one. So I congratulate them on their work. And I also want to just say something quickly without a lot of detail. And I just want to tell Mr. Trout that I'm very much supportive of the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing what you're going to have to go through with your mother. I went through the same thing recently, and I wish all the best for her. Thank you.
It's summertime, it's getting hot outside. Please remember that your dogs and cats don't have as easy access air conditioning as you do, so please remember shade and water for them. Very important. Have a great week.
Councilman Mays, Councilman Cohen, Councilman Lisser.
Now, I just wanted to second, it was just really cool seeing everybody in town watching, glued to their telling, and I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple times, and the kid is just as good, he is the real deal. I mean, we could not ask for a better ambassador, and even watched some of his stuff today with his friend that from the Phoenix Open and stuff. Just good things.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. Yeah, class act, Gary, and he's a Shawnee Heights guy, right?
Yes.
Could it be District 4 or close to?
Absolutely.
Just checking.
Of course, everything happens. Everything good happens.
Ooh. Wanted to echo the comments about Scent as well. I am so excited about seeing, we do what we can as government, but it's those grassroots efforts that really engage the neighborhood that make that long-term difference. And I'm just very excited about a number of the developments that have been happening, and certainly Scent being one of them. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, Councilwoman Ortiz.
I too want to say, Mr. Trout, our City Manager Trout, our prayers and thoughts will be with you. And then on a different note, we hire people to come and live here, and we hire people to come and spend their money here. And City Manager has done that. Every time I turn around, his wife and him are walking, and they got bags. They got bags and stuff. So I think that says a lot when you see him out in the crowd, and he's just spending his money right here.
We have 2 individuals signed up for public comment. The first one is Mr. Spencer Duncan.
Good evening.
Spencer Duncan here, once again in my capacity as the president of the Board of Trustees over at Topeka Performing Arts Center. As I've hinted to before, I can now tell you tonight, and I want you to know that we are actively engaged in contract negotiations with a group called Keller Consulting. They have a base here in Topeka. We wanted to hire local, they're also in Lawrence, to come in and do some fundraising for us moving forward. It's been 30 years, basically, when they went to raise money to build the place, since TPAC has done any sort of major fundraising campaign. So we feel like we're due our time. We've waited patiently. Now is the time to do that. So that will assist us, and as we go through that process, we will keep you folks informed with some paperwork and other stuff that gives you information as to what that's going to look like, timelines, that sort of thing. I also will comment on the budget for TPAC. I want to thank the city staff and the city manager. They've kept us flat, which is all we've asked for. We've not asked for an increase, and I will ask you, as you go through the process, to do the same. And three things I want to point out. The first is, as we always say, that assists us in making sure that local groups can continue to use that facility at a rate they can afford. Second of all, as we go into a fundraising campaign, one thing any of you who have been through it know that when the city supports the project that they are a part of, it makes a difference when people are giving money to that effort to show that the city is behind it. The third thing, we understand the budget issues you have, not just this year, but what it looks like moving forward. So we will show you details again as we get into it. We, as I have always railed all of you, you own the building, and I always say there's capital improvements we've got to do, and you need to help us pay for it. And you acknowledge that, but as with any things, it's not a top priority, and those maintenance have had to be deferred through the years. We are going to build into part of this fundraising campaign, since TPAC has no debt, while the majority of it will go towards things like future programming, bolstering our youth education programs, and giving us some economic stability. We are going to look at building into that basically several $100,000 of doing some of those improvements as a way for TPAC to say, we understand the issue, we want to take that pressure off of you, a city budget, and also the taxpayers of the city of Topeka, if we can do that as part of this process. So thank you for keeping us flat so that we can build that into this project and look at that. And again, we'll talk with staff as we move forward about what those will be, how that would work. But we want you to know we have taken that very seriously, and it's going to be part of our fundraising project moving forward. The last thing I'll comment is this past week and a half, TPAC was able to host the Day of Giving. As you know, that was at Fairlawn Plaza. Community Foundation was unable to do any sort of matching, and there was some concern that it was just going to kind of die on the vine. Our executive director, Larry Goronsky, said, wait, we don't have matching funds, but we don't want it to go away. So we will host it. We had over 100 organizations. We had a pretty good turnout. And hopefully we will be able to announce to you sooner rather than later that next year there may be a company who's willing to come in and do some matching funds. So we're glad we were able to keep that alive so it didn't die on the vine and may have a bright future. So I thank Larry and the TPAC staff for putting that together. So that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, and that's an awesome report. Next person signed up to speak is Mr. Clark Trammell.
Good evening. I don't talk as fast as Spencer does, so I have several things I want to share with you. First of all, I support what Joe said to you all earlier in the area of do more with less. But I want to add to the comments that let's remember that there are two sides to the ledger. There's expense and there's revenue. Somewhere along the line, the community needs to hear you all talk about what can we do to raise the revenue in this community, such as in migration, economic development, et cetera. Because we focus too much on the negative side, it costs this, we're going to have to raise mills, We can also raise revenue. And there's ways to do that. I'm not going to go into that, but I think it needs to be part of the dialogue when we're talking about budgets. Where you all want to enter that, maybe you're talking about it off the record, I don't know. But I think there's a dialogue that needs to take place along with the budget when we start talking about how hard things are and how tight things are. What are our options that we should start to focus on to increase revenue in this community, to offset the expenditures to provide the services that we know the community needs? So I just add that as a point of information from my perspective. Also want you all to know that I know Mr. Christie, and I've done business with him when I was in banking. and I found him to be a very honorable, capable individual. So for an endorsement or a reference, I will tell you, I think he's a good guy, and I think he'll do a good job. One last thing I want to share with you is, I'll refer to as the elephant in the room. There is a storm brewing that you all may be aware of, and if not, you need to be aware of. It has to do with the narrowing of 12th Street. And we had 2 council people at a meeting recently, 1 and 6, and it was an interesting dialogue at the Methodist Church where the majority of the community really doesn't want to see the 2 lanes narrowed, but they want to see the enhancements to the arterial design of that street, as well as any other aspects we would do to other avenues in the community. And I talk to a lot of groups, and I'm involved with a lot of groups, and I'm telling you that the sentiment of this community is they do not want to see that happen. I don't know how the dialogue got to this point, where it sounds like it's all done. It's just a matter of smoothing us all over so it happens. But I would hope you'd change the dialogue and clarify how we got here, why we're here, and realize that statistics, data of how many cars come and go doesn't tell the whole story. You've got the human factor. You've got the element of quality of life. You've got people's needs that are involved in this that may not be reflected in how many cars went through the intersection. So instead of looking at half the picture, look at the whole picture. So please look at that. Please understand your citizens, your constituencies need to hear from you. They're unhappy, and they need more dialogue. And I hope you all have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. There is no executive session amidst the disappointment of the whole group. And that being said, this meeting is adjourned.